with Dr. Brad Tucker and Matt Miller. This is Talkin Science on Trekzone.
Well, welcome to Talkin Science. We're on the road and it is week 1 of 2 that we're away, and we'll be back for week number 3. Dr. Brad Tucker is with me, as he always is, from Terra Firma in Canberra. Brad, welcome to Talkin Science on a special day.
Yes, how's it going?
Really good. I'm glad I caught myself because I was about to say Happy Tuesday, our usual greeting, but it wouldn't have worked.
No, that's right. Well, time is relative. We know that.
Exactly right, especially crossing that international date line and just suddenly losing 20 hours.
Exactly, that's right. In addition to, the time you wish you were not on the airplane, but that's a different story.
Those 10 hours in that seat. Hey, something that doesn't take 10 hours, or maybe takes a little bit longer than 10 hours, is Light Sail 2. It's deployed at Sail.
That's right. So this was a project essentially to test, can you use the sun, or what we call light particles from the sun, the photons, as a sailboat, essentially, as a way or an energy source. This was kind of really the first demonstration in space of deploying its sails and then trying to see if the sun can push on it and move it through space. And the answer, it looks like, is yes.
This is really cool because I'm going to say that Star Trek predicted this, and being a Star Trek fan side, it's our link back. There was an episode in the Deep Space Nine series towards the end of season 3 where the aliens that we were on the space station with, the Bajorans, their mythology had created these massive space vehicles where they'd been travelling to another solar system using a very similar technology. They've been using space winds, and it just so happens that there was a tachyon field, particles called tachyons, which would propel them into faster than light travel, and that's how they would do the Star Trek warp drive. So it's really fascinating to know that we're doing this with photons from the sun, free energy, basically getting a free boost.
That's right. And it's an interesting idea that's been around. In fact, we used something similar to fix the Kepler Space Telescope when it broke, is by rotating it so that essentially the flat side, the solar panel side, faced the sun. I was actually able to put enough photon pressure on it to actually push it and control it in space. So it's a really cool way. I think the biggest question is, how fast can they get to? How much can they use? Obviously, as they keep getting pushed and pushed, it goes faster and faster and faster. One of the issues, though, is obviously as you get further away from the sun, that wind or that photon pressure decreases, so you don't get as much. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with it.
It's fascinating, too, because solar photons have no mass, but they do have momentum, and that's really what we're working on here.
That's right. It kind of goes back to this equation, equals mc squared, where m is mass, c is the speed of light. Well, it is a massless particle, but what travels at the speed of light? Light. And energy essentially hitting an area is a pressure or a photon or a momentum. And so you can act on that as a pressure. This is the same concept we use for these lasers that we're building to deorbit space debris. So again, it's kind of this cool thing that's really come around into, beyond science fiction, but something we can actually practically do.
Get exclusive access to podcasts and behind-the-scenes info by becoming a member on Patreon today. Supporting Australia's unofficial home of Star Trek gets even better, with membership starting at just $1 per month. Jump over to patreon.com/TrekZoneOrg.au. France joining Trump with his ideas of Space Command.
Yeah, so, this is... Look, it's a loaded thing, let's say that. And, we talked about where Space Force was headed and what it was trying to do and those sorts of things. It's interesting in the sense that, France has now kind of said, we are, in addition to CNES, which is the French space agency, going to take a proactive role, let's say that, in space defense affairs. And as we were talking about a couple months ago, it kind of ends up being a slightly slippery slope, and one that, so to speak, we have to watch the space carefully about where it's going to head, because no one really knows where it's going to head.
I'm fascinated too because France and the US and many other countries signed the Outer Space Treaty, which was, the guarantee that we wouldn't be militarizing space. Is this treaty in need of a desperate upgrade from 52 years ago, or?
So, I mean, this is part of it, right? When the Outer Space Treaty was signed in '67, this was really just to appease the US and Russia in their quest for the moon. And, no one was expecting what was happening, what was the technology available today. When this was signed in '67, no one was really expecting the technology that we have today. And there are groups, especially here in Australia, saying, look, we need to look at this and figure out how we're going to do it, in the sense that the U.S. has actually passed kind of country laws that circumvent parts of the laws in terms of, say, resources. But also, there's a lot of loopholes, right? So, yes, space is for the peaceful use. But I think what Space Force and Space Armada, or the French Space Legion, I don't know what it's going to be called, Napoleon and space, I don't know.
Are they going to take white flags with them?
Is that really what we're going to see is its interaction with the ground, right? How do they use space as a new means for conflict on the ground? So it's this really interesting gray area, again, as you say, that needs a bit of updating, so to speak.
It's really been this new frontier as well, as you say, with the technology that we couldn't have predicted in '67. It is so integral. Those geosynchronous satellites in general have just become so crucial to day-to-day communications and activities, getting us here in the middle of the night, 10 hours from Australia, all relying on satellites and satellite communications and satellite GPS and all this sort of stuff. So there is this big battleground almost coming. That's right. If not here already.
Yeah, I mean, the way to really take out a country is to disable its satellites, especially one of the quote unquote superpowers, US, China, Russia, even Europe as a whole. You take out that capability, you've knocked out then automatic GPS, so they can't navigate. Bombs are useless. But then some of the financial markets will close, communication markets will shut down, and communication ability will shut down. It's a big, quick trickle-down effect where you don't have to do the quote, shock and awe that we saw in previous wars past, but it just disables a country real quick. And it's a very interesting world what's headed, so to speak.
New content is being added all the time to Trekzone's YouTube channel, Talkin Science, with Dr. Brad Tucker on Tuesdays, Trekzone Live on Thursdays, and a Trekzone Conversation on Saturdays. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe and ring the bell to get fresh public releases.
Now, Brad, we have talked, it seems to come up every week, I think it's a happy coincidence, talking about astronomers naming things. There is obviously a reasoning behind all of this sort of stuff, but a near-Earth asteroid has been named 2019 OK, and it wasn't quite okay, was it?
So firstly, in our defense, the naming scheme, there was a bit of logic in that the first letter represents the half month it was discovered. So A is the first half of January, B is the second half of January, and so on. Okay. And then K would be that sequential order. So A is the first, B, C, etc. So yep. It's nice that 2009 OK happened to be a very close object that in space terms was a pretty close shave.
70,000 kilometers. I think that's inside the Earth-Moon orbit, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 5 times closer than the Moon is. In fact, it's only twice as high as GPS satellites, something that we don't necessarily appreciate. GPS satellites are at 36,825 kilometers. So it's nearly at our GPS satellite. So pretty close. And, one of the big questions is always when 2019 OK came up was, is this rare? I think the problem is it's kind of rare for something 100 meters to come that close. I think it's actually more that it's just we don't know about it. we know that we only know about 1% of the asteroids going up to about a kilometer. So there's probably heaps of these things we don't know skimming the Earth quite often.
And it was only discovered and warning given within a couple of hours of it actually passing by.
It was. And this highlights one of the problems is that, we need to find them. We need to know where they are. And if we're not looking, we're never going to see them. And we've talked about this, how we're not really good at searching in the skies, especially the southern hemisphere is relatively blind and looking. And so one of these can come out of nowhere and we'll miss it, i.e. just like this. We're not going to destroy the Earth. This isn't going to destroy the Earth. We're not going to wipe out human species. And it's unlikely to hit your favorite city or not favorite city, depending on what you're thinking that day. But it is likely that these hit the Earth. They hit the Earth fairly regularly, and it is only, quote unquote, a matter of time until they hit a large metropolitan area and cause a lot of damage.
And it seems to be maybe almost this 100-year event with Tunguska in 1908, Chelyabinsk
in Russia, though. 100 years in Russia, to be fair.
Well, to be fair, maybe there's something about Russia.
That's right. Well, look, it's interesting because when the Tunguska event happened in 1908, everyone was thinking aliens, of course. That never is. And look, we always theorized and said, hey, we think this is just a large asteroid, and we think this is what happens in two stages. It hits the Earth's atmosphere and explodes, and this explosion releases essentially energy more equivalent than a nuclear bomb. And that would wipe out the trees and all the sorts of things that we saw in Tunguska. And then a small fragment hits and creates a crater. And then sure enough, 2013, we saw the thing in Chelyabinsk. And luckily, because dash cams were so popular, for a long time in Russia, everyone got heaps of photos and videos of this thing happening, and exactly what we thought. You can hear and feel the shockwave hit when that object or feel when that object hits the Earth, and you can feel the power of it. And then you can see the fireball coming, and then it creates a crater. And that was 20 meters. So the Russian Chelyabinsk one was 20 meters. This one was 5 times larger, which means the energy would actually be almost 20 to 30 times larger. So we're talking about something that's 20 to 50 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb.
It is incredible and almost unfathomable in some regards to comprehend.
It is. And look, based on tracking, we think more of these have hit besides just Russia in the past recently. But most of the Earth is uninhabited. Water, Antarctica, large parts of Australia, the U.S., Canada, etc., or Russia. So we do think they hit probably more often than we think, just no one's really around. If a large asteroid hits, is anyone there to hear it? Well, potentially the aliens, but, so it is that we're starting to see these more, partially because we have better cameras and better looking, but these do hit. It's not an abstract worry. This isn't scientists just being alarmist to be alarmist. This is just our reality. And I think one of the issues we have as an astronomers is that it's not really a scientific thing. We're not going to learn anything much. We're not going to learn more. We're not going to discover secrets of the universe by finding more of these and tracking them. It's like a service. It's no different than tracking bushfires or weather for cyclones. It's really a service to the Earth. And if we find these things early enough, we can definitely issue warnings about where we think it's going to hit.
One might say, Brad, that we need a different kind of space force.
Well,
a civilian space force.
Look, it's kind of true. And there are a lot of these small telescopes now popping up to do this. So the project that found this was called So Near in Brazil. And there's another one, a big one in Atlas, which is started in Hawaii and going to now have a facility in Chile. The problem is that we just have not had any since 2012 in the Southern Hemisphere, really until this year or last year, that has the ability to search for these regularly. We always find it by accident, but do a dedicated search. It's actually a funny story. With that Chelyabinsk one, NASA or the U.S. government shut down or canceled the near-Earth object budget February 1st, 2013. February 13th, 2013, it hits over Russia. February 14th, the budget's reactivated. It was not planned as much as it worked to our advantage. We didn't plan that, but Happy coincidence.
Happy coincidences indeed. Well, a happy coincidence is going to be next week when I'll be talking to you from Vegas, and you'll have done your flyby of the US. I believe that you're in Boston and a couple of other...
And New York and DC, that's right. It's a quick US trip, so I'll fly over you tomorrow.
Well, I'll be sure to look up and wave, Brad. But for everybody else, they can find you on social media at btucker22 on Twitter and Dr. Brad Tucker on Facebook. Brad, thanks for talking science, and we'll chat next week.
Sounds good.